Welcome to the Porsche Club of Great Britain Clubhouse. My name's Adam Towler, and today I've got these two absolute beauties with me, a 996 Carrera and a 997 Carrera. Now, this isn't a buyer's guide, but I am going to try and assist you if you're asking the question, what modern classic water-cooled 911 should I buy? We won't be talking about turbos, and we won't be talking about GT3s either, because let's face it, they are a world unto themselves. No, this is about the humble but magnificent Carrera. Let's dive straight in. So before we go any further with this video, I just have to tell you about the official Porsche Club of Great Britain. If you're an enthusiast of Porsche, whether you own one or not, you've got to join the club. There's so much that it offers, from a high quality monthly magazine, I would say that because I'm the editor, there's national meetings, events, regional stuff, member discounts, it just goes on and on. For more details, check out the link in the description below. Right, enough of that, let's get back to these two great 911s. Right, so the first thing to say is that while these two cars are at a very similar price point, there is some overlap. You could easily spend more on a really nice 996 Carrera 4S compared with, say, a scruffy 997 Carrera. So while money is a factor, there is more at play here. And anyway, should you consider the cheaper car, the 996, for its inherent qualities? Now, of course, there is the second generation of 997 as well, but we'll only be touching briefly on that car because they are a lot more money. And anyway, it's the first generation of 997 that, of course, shares the same family of engines with the 996. Here's the thing, these two cars are essentially the same car, and yet they're very, very different. What they share fundamentally is the same platform. That is to say, the basic monocoque structure and key things like suspension hardpoints and design. I think it's best to think of this car as a very, very heavily evolved version of this car. The next thing to say is that this is a car that was launched in late 1997, and with the lead development times in the motor industry, what you're looking at here essentially is early to mid-90s technology. Now, I'd argue it was cutting edge at the time, but still, I think we could call this a proper, genuine classic car now. Then again, the most recent of these went on sale in 2012, so even the youngest is now around 14 years old, and I think you could argue that also means this is a classic car. In total, there are 15 years between the beginning and the end of production, and a lot can change in that time. Now, I'm not going to delve too much into the background of the 996 today, but it is important to remember that this was a major departure for the 911. After all, every 911 from 1964 through to the appearance of this car was essentially the same car, but with an awful lot of development along the way. But this car, well, it was all new, apart from the rear suspension, but that's another story. This is a very modern car, modern monocoque construction, aerodynamics, safety, airbags, catalytic converters, water cooling. Nearly 30 years on, this still feels kind of contemporary. Right, so let's zoom right out. What are the fundamental differences between these two cars? Well, predictably, legislation played a part. This is a stronger, safer car, but naturally a heavier one. How much so? Well, an early one of these, supposedly 13-20 kilograms. A Gen 2 car like this one, maybe 20 kilograms more, but it really does depend on spec and they can weigh more. One of these probably starts at 14-20 kilos. So guess what? That really does affect how they feel from behind the wheel. Now, this is also a stiffer car, One of these, a Carrera 4, like this one, is stiffer than a 996 Carrera 2. I would say that a C2 that's had a hard life, you would be able to tell the difference. Obviously, the outer panels are different. Now, this Gen 2 car, launched in 2001, has the teardrop headlamps first seen on the turbo from 2000. It's also easily recognisable by these pronounced bone lines in the front and rear bumpers, which give it a sharper, slightly crisper look. Having said that, I've always loved the look of the Gen 1 996 as well, including its fried egg headlamps. But not everybody thinks that, whereas I don't think I've ever met anyone that doesn't think this isn't a great looking car. Now, because they're based on very similar platforms, the design department had to work really hard to differentiate the two models because, apart from anything else, they actually share the same roof panel. But the obvious thing with the 997 is these pronounced rear wheel arches, and yet the dimensions of the cars are actually very similar, and it's created by the sill here popping out and forming this arch. Whereas with the 996 you get this bar of soap effect, and yet I've also always really liked that as well because it harks back to the pre-B series 911 that had no wheel arch flares whatsoever. Okay, let's get into the details, and with a 911, what better place to start than at the rear with the engine. Now, as we've already said, both of these cars, they share the same family of engines, and I'm not going to get too hung up on engines today. If you want to read about the M96 and M97 engines, you could spend a lifetime on the internet reading about them. But in short, the early ones of these, the Gen 1s, have the 3.4 litre engine with 300 horsepower. Gen 2s like this car, 3.6 litres, 320 horsepower. The extra displacement on one of these is achieved by a longer stroke, which makes these a really kind of strong, mid-range, grunty sort of engine. However, they haven't quite got the same, shall we say, fizzy, excitable character as those early units, so it is personal taste. Now, are these a nightmare? No, of course not. There are so many of these cars on the road, giving great pleasure to their owners. Yeah, they do have some inherent weak spots, but what high-performance engine doesn't, regardless of the brand? What I would say is do your homework. Do your homework. Be realistic. If it has done a high mileage and you don't know how it's been driven to that point, well then, guess what? It will be a bit of a gamble, just like it would with any high-performance car. Now, I know of 996s that have ripped past 200,000 miles, but it does depend how they're driven, hopefully hard but sympathetically, and of course how they're maintained as well. Now, by comparison with the 997, now you've got two versions of the engine. For the Carrera, such as this car, you've got effectively the 3.6 litre engine out of the Gen 2 996 carried over, but with just some small tweaks. It's now got 325 horsepower, and it's a really lovely engine, just mellow, linear power delivery, really sweet. Love it, absolutely love it. But most people are inevitably drawn to the Carrera S with a 3.8 litre version of that engine. It's got its own type number, M97, whereas the one over there and in here, both are M96s, which shows you how similar they are. Now, the S has 355 horsepower, and that extra displacement is achieved via a larger bore size in the engine, which means it's got a really effervescent, exciting character. Conversely, I've had a Porsche specialist in the past tell me that when it came to bore scoring and other issues, it wasn't a matter of if, but when with an S. Now, do I believe that? Not really, but there is less metal in this engine, so any issues with cooling, coolant, or just warm-up regime, the S engine is liable to be less tolerant. Now, the other difference between these two cars is sound, and by that I mean the induction noise in the cabin, because with a 996 they're actually quite quiet when you're just driving normally and sedately. And I think it was probably customer feedback that meant by the time of the 997, Porsche made sure that there is much more of an engine note in the car. Now, Of course, fit a sports exhaust to either and you get plenty of that lovely M96, M97 flat six rumble. And now onto a really crucial part of this comparison, the chassis and the running gear. Now, because they're on very similar platforms, they both have McPherson strut front suspension and a multi-link rear axle. So naturally, there are a lot of similarities in the way they drive. 996s, 17-inch rims are standard, 18s optional, especially on the later cars, quite common, this car has them. 997s, 18-inch rims are standard, 19s optional, but on the Carrera S, you got the 19s as standard. It's one of the reasons so many people opted for the S. This car has that lobster claw design wheel, but it's not an S, it is just a Carrera. The other new development on the 997 was the fitment of Porsche's PASM adaptive damping. Now, this offered two modes, but don't get too excited because sport mode is ludicrously firm. Nevertheless, normal, that still adjusts the damping on the fly, and it means that you get an acceptable ride quality on the big 19-inch rims. You can get 19s without PASM, and you can also get it with sport suspension, which again is passive damping, lower ride height and firmer. Now, those cars look so good, but they can be quite unyielding. Having said that, one of these on 18-inch rims can bump and thwack a little bit over poor surfaces. One of these on 18s with the standard non-PASM suspension is actually a really sweet car. Doesn't look as good, but in the UK at least works really well. Now, one small but really important difference between these cars is in their steering setups. Now, they both use Porsche's hydraulically assisted power steering system, and compared with something like the 991 that followed, it's an absolutely brilliant setup for feedback and feel. However, they are not the same. With the 997, Porsche introduced a variable ratio, which means when you first start turning the steering wheel away from straight ahead, the ratio is a bit slower and then it speeds up as more lock goes on. Whereas this car, well, it's completely linear, old-fashioned, analog, if you like. So if that's the kind of feel in a car that you like, you will gravitate towards this car. Personally, I like both setups, but it is a key point of difference. Now, while we're down here, road noise, looking at these tyres, it is perhaps the biggest flaw with this multi-generational platform, and especially on UK roads you do get a lot of tyre noise, especially coming up through the rear wheel arches. Other than that, well, brakes, nothing wrong with the brakes on a 996, but the pedal feel isn't as solid as maybe I would like, and they do show their age a little bit, whereas one of these, especially a Carrera S with the bigger brakes, much more powerful braking system, feels much more modern. Talking of the S model, another thing which made that car so appealing in the marketplace at the time was that you got the xenon lightronic lamps as standard. Now, with the 996, the standard headlamp originally just a basic halogen lamp. With a Gen 2 car like this, you have the projector beam, but the standard lamp is still a halogen bulb. This one's got the lightronic xenons, but the standard Gen 2 996 is a halogen bulb. By modern standards, they're really not very good at all. You can upgrade the bulbs, but it's not ideal. So don't underestimate the allure of finding a car with lightronics, but of course if you go for a 997 and you go for an S, you will get that as standard, and it's really worth having. Now, the 996's interior has always been controversial, hasn't it? But to be fair, there's a really big difference between an early Gen 1, especially if it's got the plastic dash, and a well-specified later Gen 2 car like this one. Now, I've always really liked the curvy forms and the simple oval switchgear, but many are not impressed, and you have to say that Porsche felt clearly that they could do a better job as well, which they did with the 997. Now, one of the key differences between these cars, and a reason to choose one over the other, is the ergonomic differences. Now this is entirely subjective, but for me, if I sit so that my legs are at the right angle, I am simply too far away from the steering wheel. My arms are outstretched, as you can see. There's very little adjustment with the steering wheel. There's a bit of reach, but there's nothing height-wise. Moreover, the standard comfort seat in the 996, I honestly think it has to be one of the worst performance car seats ever designed. You sit far too high, they do some really weird things to your lower back, and they offer, as you can see here on this example, absolutely no support whatsoever. They're useless for fast driving, and actually they're not very comfortable for long distances either. Now, there is the wingback sports seats option, and they do offer more support, but you're still too high, and they're still very narrow here. They're not very satisfactory. Both of these cars have a superb 6-speed manual gearbox, which brings me on to the thorny subject of the automatic. Now look, I get it. If you have to have an automatic, then the Tiptronic S, the 5-speed torque converter slusher box, is your option. And if you're driving almost exclusively in the city, or you just don't maybe care about driving and you just want a 911 to be seen in a 911, maybe that's the box for you. It's not to be confused with the 7-speed twin-clutch PDK box fitted to the second generation of 997. But when it comes to these two cars, for me, it's absolutely got to be the manual option every time. When it comes to the 997, those changes to the platform that I mentioned earlier have major ramifications for the driving position and the comfort in this car. Now, one of the things Porsche did was completely revisit the ergonomics, and they decided to make the car much more applicable to a wider percentile range of people. So now the pedal box has been moved further forward in the chassis, and these new seats, much more supportive, much more comfortable. They are lower in the car, and there is a lot more steering wheel adjustment. Now the net result of all of that is, for me at least, this is a much more comfortable, sporty driving position. As for the interior itself, well, the jury is still a little bit out on whether it actually wears any better over time compared with the 996, but I think you have to say this is a much more stylish, luxurious feeling. The perceived quality, at any rate, is far higher. It's more practical, it's more usable, it's a more premium interior. Quite frankly, it's just a nicer place to be. So there you have it, two absolutely brilliant sports cars, two brilliant 911s. For me, the real key is how they comprehensively nail that virtuous circle of attributes that has always really defined the 911. They're both really good looking, fast, involving to drive, good on a circuit, not too expensive to run, not too time consuming, they don't use too much fuel. I mean, that list, it just goes on and on and on. They're kind of annoyingly good at everything. Now, which one would I go for? To be honest with you, I would buy either of them. I'd buy both of them, I would, but for slightly different reasons. Would I buy a 996 if I could afford a 997? Well, you know what? Maybe I would, but it would depend on the individual weighting I gave to specific qualities. This car, lighter, simpler, a little bit more analog in feel. That's reason alone for picking it. Or perhaps you just like the way it looks. Then again, the 997, it can never be the wrong choice. It's such a good looking car. It's one of my favourite Porsches. It's just one of my favourite cars, full stop, ever. It's a glorious machine. Choose either and you're getting a very special car. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please consider subscribing, and we'll be bringing you more content like this very soon.